Hello, everybody. I'm Kurt Wilker Jr. This is the CoinGeek Weekly live stream. However, we are not live. This is going to be a Q&A session, pre-recorded. We are going to do some questions from the audience. If you saw my tweet about 2 weeks ago, well, from the time this is being viewed anyways, but if you saw my tweet from 2 weeks ago, I asked for 5 questions you've always wanted to ask about Bitcoin. And then we're going to answer them for you, or I'm going to answer them for you, and you're going to enjoy watching them. So I guess we can kick it off. Let me give a little bit of a preamble here. Thanks to our sponsors, cryptocraft.com, the gate to chain people. I think we may show the video even again. But yeah, cryptocraft.com, you need to go check them out. It is the place to check prices, check the news, really nice news aggregation, and forums. So thank you, cryptocraft.com. But let me give a little bit of caveat as to the nature of these questions. Most of them are organically harvested from my Twitter responses. However, we did seed a couple of questions. So me and Alex Moon decided what would be some good questions to sort of kick this bad boy off. And then, yep, that's basically it. So we're going to maybe do this show a little bit short, but I hope you enjoy it because I intend for it to be very informative. So let's cut to the gate to chain ad, and we'll be right back with questions.
What does it take to make something useful? The will to do so. Gate to chain.
All right, we're going to do this as rapid fire as possible. Alex Moon, question 1. FAQs. What is Bitcoin? I feel like this should be easier, right? Actually, I think this is the most confusing question in the history of Bitcoin. And there's a reason why. I'm going to start by criticizing Satoshi Nakamoto. He used the word Bitcoin to describe the protocol, like the concept, the rule system, etc. He used it to describe the network, and he used it to describe the currency within the network. So the following sentence is true, both philosophically, practically, and grammatically. I am going to send Bitcoins over Bitcoin because Bitcoin is awesome. Yes. So thank you, Satoshi. No, honestly, it's kind of a pain in the ass. So and really, it's been a source for really irritating people to social engineer other people into understanding Bitcoin the way they want to. So if I had a criticism for Satoshi, and I have a couple actually, that's one of them. In my opinion, I think it's very clear that Bitcoin, as defined in the Bitcoin white paper, is an unbroken chain of digital signatures. He described it as such. We define a coin as an unbroken chain of digital signatures. So that's all well and good, but maybe that's too simple. So let's roll it back and think about what is a digital signature. So in law and in cryptography, actually, a chain of digital signatures is a proof that something is valid from its genesis, or in some cases, the genesis of the network, and all the way until you've received it. This is how you validate and verify that the coin in your hand is a Bitcoin. Easy, right? Well, unfortunately, this concept of soft forks was created in, gosh, I want to say it's probably 2011, 2012. I think the first serious soft fork was the P2SH soft fork. That's pay to script hash, which is a way to lock and unlock multi-sig wallets, essentially. It does a couple other things, but it was forked in via soft fork because they didn't want nodes to have to cooperate and coordinate with each other in order to stop from splitting the chain. So they made the change in such a way that they could change the protocol without demanding that anybody proactively do anything. Now, that's a big problem for me. The problem is that not in P2SH necessarily. I don't think P2SH was malicious. I didn't like it as a technology, but I don't think it was malice. However, the technology developed to push it through, this soft fork, made it that You can perhaps send a transaction that doesn't have a valid Bitcoin signature, but follows some other rule instead, and the network treats it as if it was a Bitcoin anyways. Really good example of this, probably the ultimate example of this is SegWit. So a SegWit signature isn't, well, it's not really a signature at all. It is a hash that promises you that a signature exists somewhere, that it has been observed, and that the hash is an attestation that the signature exists and was observed. So that's as good as a Bitcoin, right? Um, that's where we get philosophical. And because we've gotten philosophical there, we literally split the network over it. This is when Bitcoin Cash split from BTC, and it was a big change. It was a big change across the network, and really was a philosophical battle going into it. And so, for me, I think if you go back to Satoshi's definition of a Bitcoin, an unbroken chain of digital signatures, it's very obvious that the split on August 1st that preceded the SegWit fork in Bitcoin made BCH the valid chain of digital signatures from there forward. And then in November 2018, BSV going forward, in my opinion, is very clearly the Bitcoin chain. Now, this is an interesting one, too. Now, the BCH BSV split, there wasn't really a change in signatures, but it was a change in adding extra opcodes and changing the way that transactions are ordered. So it's basically taking what we know about Bitcoin, a bruised Bitcoin, a Bitcoin that has been through a brutal civil war, and then they wanted to add stuff that just wasn't ever there before. So they're making their way away from Bitcoin, whereas conceptually, BSV consistently makes its way toward Bitcoin. Now, an interesting thing, and maybe this will be a little controversial, I actually think that all three versions of Bitcoin, BTC, BCH, and BSV, if we're being very, very practical and fair, if you look at them, you can say that, it's kind of like they're three versions of Bitcoin that are out of consensus and have yet to orphan one another. And so, I look at that and say, that could be true. Somebody's got to orphan everybody else, because Bitcoin is not designed to have three versions of itself on the same hashing algorithm, and that causes all kinds of weird economics between the chains and mining and all this other stuff. So all of this to say, it's a really, really long answer to try to give some context, but there's like 6 or 7 years of scholarship and argument and brutal civil war that goes into which side of this you fall on. And frankly, it's a political response, which is really unfortunate, because I think it's a really easy one. If you just wind yourself all the way back to the white paper, look for the unbroken chain of digital signatures, look for the crystal clear definitions that Satoshi Nakamoto gave us in section 5 of the white paper. And he also gives a diagram, like, this is what a Bitcoin looks like. Here's what the network looks like. Here's how the nodes work. Here's all these things. It's very, very clear how the network should be governed, how it should be transacted upon, and how things should be validated. And BTC doesn't do any of those things the same way as it used to. And so this is why I take a philosophical position and look at BSV and say, this is the thing that looks like Bitcoin, and therefore it is Bitcoin. It synchronizes back to the Genesis block. Its nodes are they will validate a transaction from 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, at all into infinity, as long as you have your valid keys. And your keys that are pre-fork 2017 are valid on all chains. So there you have it. That's Bitcoin. I'm going to leave it at that. Next question, please. How does 1 BTC equal 1 BTC where there is no fiat? In a world where BTC is the only money accepted, how is money creation and distribution managed? I'll stop there for now. So, okay. So it seems like he's talking about measuring sticks. Like, we measure things in fiat. When I want to buy a can of Coke, it's a dollar or two or three or four. But the measuring stick that I'm using is a US dollar, because I have a predisposition as an American to measure things against the fiat currency of my nationality. This is how I was raised. This is how I account for things in my head. However, the delightful Mr. Moon over on the other side of the pond there has a predisposition to measure things in British pounds or quid or whatever they say about their money over there. They have more nicknames for money than anybody, I think, the British. But who's to say that's wrong? Like, it's the same can of Coke, but different measuring sticks because he's in a different place. Now, you'd have a similar thing. You go to Russia and you have rubles. You go to India, you have rupees. You go to Japan and you've got your yen, and you're going to measure based on whatever works for you, whatever makes more sense. Now, the reason that it doesn't make sense to measure things in Bitcoin today is because of the volatility of its purchasing power. It's not a good measuring stick because that Coke could be, zero point zero 0.01 Bitcoin one day, and maybe it's 0.02 Bitcoin the next day. But that's a volatility problem based largely on liquidity. And the liquidity issue is based on the fact that people aren't using it regularly in commerce. If there was global trade occurring in Bitcoin, well, then it becomes roughly as stable as the other assets relative to its supply, demand, and utility at a given time. So, oil, for example, is relatively stable, week to week, unless there's a big problem with the supply. And so we see things like the war between Russia and Ukraine made oil prices move around a lot. So did inflation, so did taxes, so does OPEC policy, and a bunch of other things. But outside of those times when it does a big whipsaw zigzag, it's actually pretty stable. You can predict oil, project it out pretty well going into the future. Sans these variables. And it's funny because the dollar also fluctuates. Fiat currency fluctuates all the time. A forex trader will tell you, hey man, you should have bought the dip on rubles because rubles crashed to below all-time lows, but the nation of Russia didn't collapse. So it was a good trade opportunity to convert dollars to rubles at the bottom and watch it whip up to the top. And actually, the ruble has ripped up to near all-time highs. And so there are opportunities on things like that. But again, it's people aren't using Bitcoin by and large as the measure of money. And that's the problem. This is why people don't want to measure against it because it's inconsistently measured, and that really is a function of a lack of use in the economy and the utility itself. So another thing that you can do conceptually, imagine this, is maybe we don't get all the way to a Bitcoin standard, okay, where everything is measured against Bitcoin. Everybody has Bitcoin. Everybody's going to make their purchases and take their salaries and pay their taxes or whatever in Bitcoin. That may not happen, okay? But here's what could happen. You could use Bitcoin the way that gold used to be used as the undergirding asset of another currency, of a dollar, for example. So dollars used to be redeemable for silver or gold, and it was a certain amount. A dollar is actually a weight value. Like that word dollar is a measurement of weight. And so you could do the same thing with Bitcoin. You could say that a dollar equals 50 satoshis or something like that. Pick a number. And so there's a certain amount of sats that equal $1. And then you create a standard by which Bitcoin is no longer volatile. It is a store of value and a measurement of value, but so too is a dollar. A dollar represents a certain amount of satoshis. Now, there's some interesting stuff that can go into that too, especially when you consider things like a CBDC, essentially. So imagine a CBDC that has an undergirded price and can't fall below a certain floor. So there's a very interesting case to be made there, but that's it. It's all about measuring sticks, and ultimately, in a generation or two, maybe our children will just conceptually think of things as weighted in Bitcoin. Like they'll look at a Lambo and say, "Whew, man, that car is probably like 0.01 Bitcoin. That thing's crazy. That guy must be rich," and maybe that's how it'll go. We'll see. Next one, please. Fred DeFunky. It has been 14 years since the white paper was really. Yeah, we're getting pretty close. I'll give it to you. You're within the standard deviation. That's an eternity for technology adoption. Can we honestly say Bitcoin will find true utility at this point? Is it capable of being deployed correctly to the right projects? And how does adoption increase in the coming years? Good point, man. I agree that is too long. I don't know that it's problematically wrong for the sake of Bitcoin itself. I mean, it just is, whatever. Like, there's been cases of similar things for a long time. People tried to push airplanes out commercially for 15, 20 years before it became a real industry that people were willing to trust. There's probably other examples too, but I think the timing is a little bit irrelevant. And the reason is that we've had a very weird adoption curve. Satoshi never really completely implemented Bitcoin in the way that he wanted it implemented. It was buggy. It fell over, had all kinds of governance problems, and then it disappeared on us. So um, then it got pushed sideways, got pushed off its track for a very long time, and everybody debating what's Bitcoin for? What can we do with it? Is it supposed to be anything other than a store of value? And then you have the BTC people just way off on this tangent with things like Liquid and Lightning and all this other stuff that is just it's a brain drain. And Bitcoin itself has sat basically languishing while people aren't researching what it's actually capable of. So this is like people sitting on gold, for example, before the technological revolution. Like gold sits there and does nothing. It is used as a means of exchange. It's coins, but it didn't have some other economic value other than jewelry and coinage until computers were invented. And then all of a sudden you realize, wow, gold is really conductive and non-corrosive, and that works really well for computer chips. And so the work that's gone into that has made gold valuable for new reasons. It has become part of the economy in such a way like I don't want to function without my iPhone or my MacBook. And there's gold in both of those things, and it wouldn't work without the gold that's in them. And so there's a thing there, a lesson there about Bitcoin, that people have used Bitcoin for little else other than bucket shop trading and trying to grift each other and lending scams for 13 years. And that sucks. That really, really, really sucks. But we, the big blockers, the real Bitcoiners, the people that have wanted to express Bitcoin's true economic value, its ability to create value in the real economy, well, we've been working on all kinds of really cool stuff. The problem is that people just don't think about Bitcoin that way. They're not sitting and thinking about, hey, if I launch this portion of my business onto Bitcoin, it'll make me more money. People don't think that way because they're told, buy, hodl, never spend, never sell, never use the network, and you'll be rich. And frankly, they've been right. Partially because Bitcoin has existed in a world where we've had quantitative easing nonstop since the creation of Bitcoin. And then Bitcoin has been in its heaviest subsidy period. Like we're in the bootstrap period of Bitcoin. Even 6.25 Bitcoins per block is a lot of money for doing very little work. And so there's two major subsidies at play there. It is the quantitative easing of bad money, and it's Bitcoin subsidy. And it has awarded people for being lazy for a very long time. And kind of is what it is. Now, if Bitcoin is to be successful at all, people need to, and partially quantitative tightening is going to be something that defines this next era in global economics. But then Bitcoin's halvenings are getting increasingly more draconian. They hurt more every time. And so people are going to start to get squeezed, and they're going to really, really, really have to think about how to use Bitcoin in the real world. So, Mr. Moon, let's do another question. What happens to miners of BTC when there's no more block reward? Well, there you go. Bitcoin miners are in a really rough spot with no block reward, which is why we've seen Mr. Peter Todd, who doesn't look real well, by the way, out doing a media tour about how they need to add inflation. He talks, what's 0.1% inflation forever? That's nothing. Anybody that thinks that's a problem is an idiot. And, it's funny because the sort of sound money narrative, the digital gold narrative, this notion that Bitcoin is permanence, it can't be tinkered with, now getting its tree rattled a little bit by some of these guys who actually know. Peter Todd is one of the most relevant developers in the history of Bitcoin. He has pushed Bitcoin in the direction, specifically BTC, has gone a lot of directions just because Peter Todd said it would and pushed his way through. So I would pay close attention to what Peter Todd has to say. It's a curiosity that all of a sudden he's pushing this narrative more and more and more. He's been whispering it for a good 2 or 3 years now that inflation is necessary. But the reason inflation is necessary to a guy like Peter Todd is because they will not consider the notion of raising the block size, which to me is like, why is that the sacred cow? The fixed supply, the perfect hard money, the auditability of the fact that only 21 million total coins will exist. That's the sacred cow. Why is the block size the sacred cow? It just is. It's absurd to me. But they have planted that flag and will die on that hill. Remember, Peter Todd is the guy who produced the first video explaining small block economics. And it's really weird. It's really Orwellian, like a big bankster, just it kind of reminds me of like Pink Floyd The Wall. Like it's just got this weird, ominous tone to it, and explaining how if we ever raise the block size limit, it'll have been the product of a corporate takeover of Bitcoin. Like the banks want bigger blocks. And like it's just so absurd. Because as we've seen, the small block Bitcoin, the BTC version of Bitcoin, has become the darling of the banking economy in response to everybody fighting to keep the block small. So a lot of weird stuff going on there. What we actually need is when the subsidy dries out, we need to figure out a way to have at least 50 Bitcoins per block again. That was the standard Satoshi gave us. In 2009, the first block gave the first miner 50 Bitcoins. And it did that for the first 4 years of mining. That was until 2013. If you mined a block, every block you mined got you 50 Bitcoins. And we haven't seen a 50 block or 50 coin block since 2013. Nobody's figured out how to get 50 coins back into a block. And that's a travesty. That's what Satoshi told us that Bitcoin should look like. Now, the only way to get there, the only way to fit sufficient transactions into a block to get to 50 Bitcoins is for the block size to be big enough to hold that many transactions. Just to get back to earning sats the way we were able to earn sats 13 or 14 years ago. No, it's 13. I'm not going to let that guy social engineer me. The only way to get back there is to have a block size that is big enough to do it. And that's it. If we don't do that, Bitcoin fails. It either fails by letting Peter Todd, pull inflation out the back door, or it fails for some other reason related to the fact that the economic policies of Bitcoin are broken and have been for a very long time. So that's it. Next question, please. Bailey Connor, what is the equivalent of a Bloomberg terminal to Bitcoin? Direct access to the mainframe. That's an interesting question. There's some tools out there. They typically apply just to BTC. I actually met the Luxor mining people the other day, and they run like a hash price index, which is kind of an index of like types of ASIC machines and how they correlate to Bitcoin's price, specifically BTC's price. And so that's kind of an interesting tool, but it's certainly not Bloomberg terminal level. But it explains like dollar prediction stuff, dollar correlated to BTC, etc. Then there's a thing like Glassnode, which is again it's a BTC tool, and but Glassnode's pretty cool in that it shows like how many new addresses have been created, how many addresses are there total. It monitors like Binance, Huobi, Coinbase, Kraken, like what okay, how many Bitcoins are sitting on exchanges versus how many are being withdrawn. Then you'll see these charts come out and be like, wow, there's more people holding Bitcoins off of exchanges relative to how many Bitcoins are held on exchanges ever. We're at an all-time high and that kind of thing. But then you can see, looks like we might have some bearish action over the next 2 or 3 days if a lot of those Bitcoins that are held off of exchanges start flowing back into them. And so you can start to make some predictions based on that kind of data, but it's nowhere near the Bloomberg quality, real tight. Just everything, because Bloomberg's got bureaus everywhere. They've got they have teams of people literally everywhere reporting news at all times, and people pay some ungodly amount of money. It's like $100,000 a year or something just to have a computer that's directly connected to the API that gives you that instant money. So they sit on the desks at places like JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, and Goldman Sachs and whatever else. So not an option out there yet, but there's an opportunity to build one, and that would be pretty darn cool. So I'm gonna take a 30-second break. We're gonna watch a little ad. I'm gonna take a drink, and we're gonna come back with more questions. So play it.
What does it take to make something useful? The will to do so. Gate to chain.
Thanks again, Gate to Chain. We appreciate your sponsorship. Next question, Mr. Moon. How are instant transactions possible on Bitcoin if the block time is an average 10 minutes? So your transaction, I like the analogy of the Visa card. Okay. So if you swipe your Visa, you can leave the restaurant, right? So it gives a pre-authorization or an authorization because for your $50 dinner, right? And they say, "Cool, sign here. You can get out of here." You take off. Well, they don't settle that transaction for 30 or 40 days. In some cases, it's probably longer. But it's instant, right? It's instant for all practical purposes for everybody involved. The restaurant gets their money. The person loses their money ASAP. Maybe it says pending on some account somewhere, but ultimately that's done, right? Bitcoin kind of works the same way. When you send a transaction, let's say I send Mr. Moon a hand cash transaction. That transaction is broadcast to the peer-to-peer network within about 1.5 seconds, and it hits the network. It propagates itself to at least 50% of the network inside of 2 or 3 seconds. It's hit basically every node on the network. It's certainly hit every node that matters on the network, and these nodes have it in their mempool. And what they do, their hash power is something like a promise that they will put it into a block as soon as they can. And so for all intents and purposes, it is a settled, no, not settled. Settle's not the right word. It's an instant transaction. And depending on the size, you can let you go. Now, they're not going to let me go to a Lambo dealer and swipe my card and drive out instantly either. They're just not going to do it. They're going to take my KYC information. They're basically going to get the information necessary to sue me or repossess the car if I stop making payments on the car. This is how it works with a bigger payment. And Bitcoin really is the same way. So here's the balance in something like BSV. So you get 6.25 coins per block at $60 a block. It comes out to 300 and $300 or $400 a block or something is what's being made in the revenue. So if you send a $500 transaction, the economics of the network should put a little bit of pressure on you to say, we're going to wait 10 minutes. I'm going to wait 10 minutes for a $500 transaction, right? To make sure that, okay, your transaction is valid, it's in a block, we're good. Now, if I'm going to send you $1 million in a BSV transaction, well, that really, it takes a lot of blocks before you feel like that $1 million is completely acceptable, right? Because there's a certain amount of blocks that make it that, okay, now it's more expensive than the $1 million to try to reorg double spend me. But that's thinking about the problem in just simple technical terms, which really isn't the right way to think about it. If you have a business relationship with people, it's not necessarily like, oh no, I've been reorged, there is no recourse. That's not how the world works. In reality, if I'm going to buy a Lamborghini from you and spend, $150,000 with you, we're going to do the same KYC. You're going to get my information to sue me if I decide to reorg you. Like, you're not just going to let me pay with a transaction and walk away with no identity, no paperwork, no anything. That's not how things work. Now, in a world where everything occurs on Bitcoin or everything is BSV, I'm going to do my title. I'm going to do my transfer. Like, all of these things are going to be tokens. I'm going to use my identity token on chain to move the title from, the current title holder to me, make me the new current title holder. And all that stuff will occur on Bitcoin. But if there's that much action happening on Bitcoin, then the price, the value of Bitcoin is much higher. And then that time makes its way down, right? So let's say we're in a world where one BSV equals $1 million. That means there's, right now there'd be $6.25 million per block. So every 10 minutes, the network is capable of very, very safely processing $6 million every 10 minutes, which comes out to 36, something like 40 or $50 million every hour. Now, it's still not really enough money for all that security, right? So how many transactions are there? What are the transaction fees? What are all these things? Actually, it's funny, we talk about small fees all the time, but it makes sense for in a high pressure, high value situation to pay a higher fee. Just make that deal with the merchant. Like, if I'm going to buy a Rolex watch for, $30,000, maybe I pay a $50 fee to do it, because that's kind of what you should do. That guarantees it gets into the next block. Everybody feels good about everything. You broadcast it directly to the nodes that you trust, and then you're in a good spot. Now, I'm not opposed to these kind of things, but don't at me about these high fees, because the only thing that matters is that you have the ability to do micropayments with very small fees. So you can send a hundredth of a penny for a cost of a thousandth of a penny, and ain't nobody doing any paperwork over a thousandth or a hundredth of a penny. It's not worth anybody's time to steal that kind of money, and it's not really worth anybody's time to steal $5 or $50 or $100 in almost any situation using the blockchain either. And this is the kind of commerce that we want to happen instantly. Buy a cheeseburger instantly. Buy a New York Times article instantly. Go, send a stupid token from one friend to another, maybe a video game access token or something like that. Instant, instant, instant. No reason to steal that money. It's impractical. It's infeasible. It would be madness to try to steal pennies or even dollars in most of these situations. And those are the problems that BSV can solve. BSV solves the other problems, the Lambo, the house, the global oil trade problems in very different ways. But it actually solves them in a similar way to, what if you were to trade global oil in BTC? Well, BTC doesn't have the bandwidth to handle the transactions of daily global oil. BSV does, because it doesn't have a bandwidth limitation either. But there's not a reason for, if I'm gonna trade a barrel of oil for $100 a barrel or whatever, it's not a reason not to put $1 on that transaction just because, and you work it into the price and whatever else. So you want that crucial instant settlement on crucial global trade. I don't necessarily need global settlement on my stupid whatever, my trivial little thing that I'm doing on the chain. So that's why it's instant, and this is why more important things, you can pay a higher fee for them. There's a lot of ways to skin the cat. Bitcoin was designed to be able to allow you to do all kinds of business, and that's my answer. Next one, sir. BTC is very close to performing weekly close above the 200-week moving average. Technically, it looks like BTC is doing well to reclaim the 200-week MA as support. It may. I was looking at it. I don't have a chart to pull up, but yeah, I always watch the 200 moving average to see if we're bullish or bearish. And it's been below that 200 for a long time, and it's knocking right on that door. If BTC can make it over that and hold it, it is a bullish indicator, which is going to make all the moon boys feel very moony again. But we'll see what happens. I don't know. Fundamentals really matter, and I keep getting emails from the Celsius people like, hey, here's how our bankruptcy's going, and I think the shoe hasn't dropped on the Three Arrows Capital and some of these other players. Who else is out there? Voyager. I think there's probably some weird stuff going on at Nexo and BlockFi and some of these other lending platforms. There's all the Tether nonsense. There's the SEC stuff. There's stuff. So be careful. The chart paints a picture, but it doesn't paint the whole picture. Next one. How can we get small businesses into Bitcoin? They see the price go up and down, and that's not good for the balance sheet. How should small businesses go about this? I think that Handcash is trying to solve this with stable coins, and I think that's probably the way to do it in the near term. I've always been kind of a Bitcoin maxi kind of guy. Like, we should measure things in Bitcoin, but that's me being an ideologue. Mom and pop, they want dollars, and if they can do dollar tokens, that's cool. That works for them. I think that's a really good thing, and I think we should all be happy about it. There's also things that you can do with it, like ticketing or other, like, this is what I like about NFTs. Like, you can do all kinds of very interesting things with NFTs that work in business that aren't monetary necessarily. They're more membership based or receipts or these kind of things. So these are some practical ways that a business could use the blockchain without having to be like, oh, I got coins on my books and it's making my accounting a nightmare. So that's my thought there. Next question, please. Oh man, when Nakamoto Club meant, I don't know, unfortunately. Why was Rare Candy so quiet? The frog had COVID. So he and I, Elon Moist and I, Josh Petty and I, hung out a few days in a row, and we both got really sick a couple weeks ago. So I don't know who started it or where it came from, but he and I both got COVID and we were pretty messed up. So he was fighting a fever, as was I. And I would guess that that's got a little bit to do with anything that is a little bit behind schedule over at Rare Candy. But I know he's excited about everything going on over there. So Number 3, should I sell BSV before it dips or hodl? Man, I cannot give you investment advice. I think it depends a lot on the rest of your portfolio. What's your debt situation? What's your income situation like? Do you need the BSV? Like, if you need to pay bills and that BSV is the only way to do it, you probably aren't in a position to be investing in anything. So, however, if you can pay your bills forever, then maybe you don't have enough BSV. So I don't know. Ultimately, it's a decision that you need to make based on your own risk profile and a whole bunch of other things. I personally have a permanent stack of Bitcoin, and then I have a stack that I tinker with, and then I have a stack that I spend from and play the apps and play the games and whatever. And then I have my money that I use to pay my bills and pay my taxes and whatever else. And you got to kind of have all of them. So that's where I'm at on that. What do we got? 2 more questions out of that guy. Is RelayX NFTs a scam? First of all, there's not a blanket answer for that question. Some RelayX NFTs are 100% scams. Some are blatant malicious scams. In fact, I have seen projects copied and pasted from other blockchains and put on RelayX as if, hey, here's my new project, and they are trying to sell NFTs on RelayX that are a literal copy and paste. The alleged right click that you don't ever that nobody ever does, right? So there's stuff like that. Like, there are, just those kind of scams. Then there's the like, hey man, this is going to be the greatest thing ever. We're going to do a generated NFT drop and it's going to be awesome. And, and then maybe it doesn't perform. I don't know. Like, some of those are probably scams, and some of those are probably people that they've never done a drop before. They kind of don't understand the market cycle of them and whatever. Then you get the people who are like really good at NFT drops, like Gopniks, for example. I like the NFTs. I like the art. I think they're fun. I think the tooling is cool. I think it's a cool way to send out interesting artwork to people. So I like them. This would be like Gopniks. I like the Psycho Parrots. I like a lot of the stuff that Bullish Art is doing, like really fine, like beautiful pieces of art, like they're really aesthetically pleasing, the kind of thing that you'd be like proud to put on your wall. So there's stuff like that too. As for RelayX, Jack and I don't see eye to eye on a whole lot of things, and I don't like the way that he behaves in a lot of circumstances, but I do actually agree with him generally on Bitcoin. So I don't know, is Jack's entire motive and business model to scam people? I don't know. I hope not. I really, really hope not. Because RelayX is a cool idea, but is it just a bucket shop? I don't know. It's on you to decide. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you. No, thank you, Andre. I appreciate it. What do we got next? How many? 2 more questions? We got Meg Graxwell. How can someone claim? How can someone claim that proof of work ought to ignore the most proof of work chain? Shut up, Greg. This is such a dumb question because it's clearly malicious. This is like, okay, I'm going to make a Civil War analogy. All right. So, as an American, this used to be a British colony, right? Until some Americans said, I really don't like being a British citizen anymore. It kind of pisses me off. And so we fought a little war, and the British decided it wasn't prudent to keep fighting that war, and we shook hands and said, okay, you're your own country now, and we're no longer all these other things. Okay, Alex just said in the comments, that's not a civil war. Okay, I also would like to point out it wasn't really a revolution either. It was a secession. It was the war for independence. Thank you. Yes, but it itself was a secession. In fact, what we call the American Civil War also wasn't a civil war. The South wasn't trying to conquer Washington, D.C. or any of that stuff. They wanted to secede. It was also a war for independence, but we don't want to go there. So in a situation where like there's a major change in the nature of how we govern things, then it becomes political. So let's say it's 1789 and I'm a 40-year-old man who just a few years ago was a British subject who, God save the king kind of guy, until I got really pissed off about like taxes and soldiers, squatting on my land and all this other stuff. It's like, was George Washington British? It's like, well, he was born British and he died American. And so what is he? It's like, well, there weren't Americans when he was born either. So how could he die American? It's like, well, they didn't like the rules and they fought really hard to change the rules, but it was for reasons that made a whole lot of sense. And ultimately, it's what happened, and the United States is still here for very specific reasons. But this is ultimately a very political question. So the proof of work, if you're not going to let the proof of work do the determination, then it doesn't matter. Proof of work is irrelevant on BTC because, and this is UASF Politics 101, the small blockers said, if you miners make a change that we don't like to BTC, we will fork you off the chain and we will do something else. So BTC is ruled by a social group. This is a general strike. So here's another good example. You have a big company full of workers. The workers decide they hate the boss, but they don't want to quit their job. So what they do is they unionize and they say, we're going to strike. We're going to stand in the parking lot and we're going to yell at the boss up there in his ivory tower until he decides to give us a raise, give us fewer hours, give us more hours, give us something, right? You make a concession as to how you run your company. Do workers have the right to tell somebody how to run their own property? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe the owner doesn't have a choice and says, shoot, I can't deal with firing everybody and trying to rehire a whole nother group of people. So whatever, we'll make a little concession, right? So then it begs the question, who actually runs the company? Is it the rabble, the labor, the workers, or is it the owner, the board, the shareholders? Who can answer that question? It's a philosophical answer. I'm not even going to answer the question, but that's how BTC works. Nobody knows who the hell is in charge in BTC. Is it the node people? Is it the HODL people? Is it the VCs that pay for all of the development and the infrastructure? Nobody knows. Nobody will answer that question all the way. Some people will, but then some other part of the rabble says, it's not how, this is, have fun staying poor. Let's kill this guy, right? And so it's bonkers. So no, BTC is 100% not governed by proof of work. BSV, on the other hand, is a proof of work blockchain. The validity of everything that occurs on BSV is determined by honest nodes rendering proof of work. So yes, we have a lot less hash power and a lot less total proof of work that is committed to governing the chain, but the chain is governed by proof of work and yours is not. Therefore, X. Have at it. Next question. Is this the last question? Last question, Mr. Moon. Tell us, Kurtspiracy. Okay. It's not a Kurtspiracy. I like that it's got my name in it because my ego's big, but it's not a conspiracy. It's just the truth. It's verifiable. This isn't, they're turning the frogs gay. The globalists, here's what they're doing. They're poisoning the water. No, okay. We're not doing InfoWars. So, no. Okay. Long story short, venture capital. They saw the threat of Bitcoin. These are the venture capitalists that ran the big payments companies. So take your pick: Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, etc. The PayPal mafia, right? They saw Bitcoin, 2010, 11, 12, whatever. So then they said, can we control it? And if we can't control it, can we destroy it? Well, the answer was they can kind of control it by controlling the way that people think about it. So what they did is they took a lot of money and they started buying developers, professional developers. Well, they took amateur developers and they turned them into professional developers. Like, hey, dude, how would you like to be a Blockstream developer and make 200 grand a year coding for Blockstream? Who's going to say no to that? Sounds like an awesome gig, right? So you take the gig, you work at the company, and the money that you make filters up to, whoever. And ultimately, it's not just Blockstream. It's Lightning Labs. It's the teams at places like Coinbase and Kraken. It's the media teams at CoinDesk. it's all the people that are sponsored by all of these other companies too. So this is like the What Bitcoin Did podcast with Peter McCormick and all of these other people. So they all end up getting all their money from the people who don't want Bitcoin to be a payments technology. And so they have created all of these little corners of the world where Bitcoin is a store of value. And if you want to spend it, you need to use other technologies from the other side of our portfolio. So this is, my Strike card or my or just Lightning Network or some of these other things. Then Lightning Network has its own grifters. So you got the blocked people, which used to be Twitter, Stripe, whatever. And then you have the block streamers have their own implementation, and then you got just all these other people that create these custodial solutions because they want to be the backbone of Lightning Network if Lightning Network is a successful thing. So they've made it that no matter what you do in BTC, that the money makes its way up to the old world bank and payments companies. And that's it. But this isn't a conspiracy. You can just Google MasterCard partners with Barry Silbert from 2014 and 15. And you can find all these press releases. MasterCard gives money to create digital currency group. Visa becomes a Strike partner, or Lightning Labs joins the World Economic Forum. Like this is Klaus Schwab, right? You will eat the bugs, you will have nothing, and you will be happy. Like this is Lightning Network, like the Lightning Labs company that they're joined to do these things. And so it's a control structure, just like everything else is a control. Just like everything else is a control structure. And then it's no longer disruptive. And then it's only good for hodl, make money. We'll bribe you in fiat to just shut up about Bitcoin as a payments technology, and you'll get rich. That'll be great. And so nobody wants to hear it. Everybody likes to call it a conspiracy. My victims call it a conspiracy. I got Alex Moon saying, "Hey, man, I know conspiracy is a good word for it. I like it, but I just want people to realize, like, you can do this research. You can see where the money came from, where it went to, and what has become of it. And what has become of it is, if you think that Bitcoin is a global payments technology, you're wrong. Have fun staying poor." And so it just kind of bums me out. But do the research. We can still win this war. BSV is Bitcoin the way it was originally designed. It's good for global micropayments or macro payments today, as well as everything else: identity, tokens, all kinds of business paperwork, and all kinds of things that I'm sure I haven't thought of. So I think that's it. That's the FAQ show. The show brought to you by cryptocraft.com, our dear friends. Check out cryptocraft.com for forums, news, and prices. And thank you, everybody, for watching this special episode. If you'd like to see more episodes like this, please let me know. Comment on Twitter, Twitch, wherever else. Send messages to Alex Moon. And if you'd like to be an advertiser, you can talk to Alex Moon too. I'd love to have your logos floating all around here. But I'm going to wrap it up. And I want to thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, hit the alert bell so you know every time we go live. And more than anything, never forget to be good to each other. Goodbye.
What does it take to make something useful? The will to do so.